Let's see, today I could be going over somebody that I haven't talked about before, reading you stories from image boards that have totally happened, or recounting the events of a mentally disabled man that has been bullied relentlessly by the internet and documented by many people that I'll never personally know. Looks like rinse do, so I'm gonna go with the very last option. Today we'll be going over the quickie page Chris and Remorse. Let's get right into it. Every so often, one of Chris's less flattering deeds catches up with him and he is forced to apologize. These apologies, like most of the other times Chris tries to come off as emotional, often feel forced and insincere, leading many trolls to wonder if Chris is even capable of feeling remorse. It's not out of the question. A common trait of autism is a lack of cognitive empathy, meaning it's likely that Chris has a difficult time trying to understand what people feel. Time and time again, he's shown himself unable to understand others' feelings of loss or sadness. He seems equally incapable of understanding how his actions could possibly hurt or anger others. Additionally, Chris is also shown to be incapable of sharing the emotional experiences of others, being affected by them, and being able to respond with an appropriate emotion due to his narcissism. This ultimately shows that Chris is incapable of understanding and feeling other people's emotional states. When he is expected to show remorse, it often seems as though he is just going through the motions, making the absolute minimum effort to get whoever he is upset to stop pestering him, so he can go back to his oblivious existence playing PlayStation 3. And here's Chris's apology to Reldnak. It's written in a really poor way, so bear with me here. Deep breath and sigh. Yes, Reldnak Natsu Nadesirk, I was naive. I was depressed for a long while. I was also still searching deep within myself to figure out myself, but I have found myself. I have matured mentally and emotionally. I was not a man. I have been a woman in soul, and now I am all woman, and I still am attracted to women. I am a lesbian and I was a trans woman. I have become better to opening myself to more people. I have dispelled my phobias and it has been good. I've feared trolls and was unable to differ between sincere fan and insincere bully. Now, as long as I am still talked about, I see them all as similar, and I answer and respond to my own pace and time. My other life situations you do not fully understand, those which hold me back, and I am more required at my home for my family. My heart is not an empty crevice, and I was misunderstood and mislabeled by a lot of bad people. I have shown and proved my kindness from my heart, and to you, Reldnak, I owe a ton of apologies. There is good in those who are gay, because that is who those people and you are. I, personally, never really had any reason to dislike men at all. We are all people, and we are who we are, but the great hatred within you, Reldnak, had to be quelled to prevent an army of hatred to rise. Regardless, I am proud of you myself, and everyone who are themselves and love everyone. Well, wasn't that sweet? I'm glad he apologized to a fictional character that he made up in his head. Concept of wrongdoing. Developing an understanding of right and wrong is an important part of a child's development. Very young children don't take into consideration what is ethically the right or wrong thing to do. They base their actions on whether they are punished or rewarded before they eventually internalize a consistent value system and learn to police their own behavior. Chris seems to be stuck in the former childlike state. If something makes him feel bad, or if experience tells him he'll get in trouble for doing something, it must be wrong. If it makes him feel good or looks like it could have potential rewards, it must be right. Other considerations, such as what his supposed faith prescribes or how this will affect others, simply do not rank. An excellent example would be how Chris managed to destroy his relationship with Megan Schroeder. Chris was at war with Encyclopedia Dramatica, who were, among other things, calling him gay. In an attempt to disprove their allegations, Chris uploaded a certain image to the website, apparently under the belief that some sort of information overload would get them to shut up. When the denizens of ED assumed the image was of Crystal, Chris was quick to correct them. At no point did he consider Megan's feelings. When she called him out, Chris didn't realize he had done anything wrong and assumed she was upset simply because she didn't watch enough porn. I understand, you may or may not have had much exposure to sexual images as I've had, so the idea of a hand job, which is the act drawn there as part of outercourse versus intercourse, was a surprise to you. I'm sorry. Chris, not getting it at all. As such, Chris isn't really capable of remorse or a sincere apology. The natural precursor to an apology is the internal realization that one has done something wrong, a realization that Chris's childish, self-centered mindset would not allow him to reach. In his mind, he's done something wrong only when people around him react negatively. Furthermore, as a rule, he assumes that their reaction is just the result of some misunderstanding, reasoning that if he was just given the chance to explain what he was trying to accomplish, they would understand and all would be forgiven. Judging by his plea for a hobby store's manager to forgive and forget, it's very likely that Chris still operates on a kindergartner-level moral philosophy in that he expects recipients of his apologies to immediately retract their disapproval and let him off the hook. which he might have experienced since it's a common scenario with smaller children and authority figures, despite being a grown adult, not realizing that such a thing no longer applies to social situations after a certain point. Given his track record for selfishness, issues with growing up, and resistance to change, that would come as no surprise. Moreover, Chris doesn't seem to understand that the purpose of an apology is essentially to promise to not repeat whichever negative behavior led to the recompense in the first place, instead seemingly interpreting it as a magic phrase to clear his slate so he can continue his self-serving endeavors unimpeded. Motivation to apologize. As explained above, Chris's logic when it comes to matters of right and wrong is almost wholly reactionary. His rationale for apologizing follows the same pattern. He issues them only when made fully aware that he won't get what he wants unless he at least tries to appear genuinely remorseful. Every apology Chris has ever made can be immediately connected to something Chris wants, and thinks he'll get if he says the magic words, "I'm sorry." We almost never have to guess what that thing might be. He almost always mentions his desired goal in the same paragraph, sometimes even in the next sentence. "I wish to apologize to Michael Snyder for that mistake I made over 9 months ago that got me kicked out of the game place. I miss my Friday nights over there. And also, y'all are the only place in town that has, Eye of Judgment cards." Chris, apologizing in order to buy stuff. "I apologize for the past unformalities and emotional outbursts in past communications. I ask for 25% of the money you and Will have made from all the audiobooks you have put together and sold." Chris, apologizing for sending Vivian a fucking death threat so that she'll pay him. Because Chris's apologies spring from this simplistic cause and effect mentality, things tend to get interesting when whoever he's issuing them to tells him all is not well and that he is not forgiven. In one notable case, he admitted to ungentlemanly conduct regarding his feud with Asperchew. It was a fairly obvious attempt to get certain ads removed from the Wikipedia, but, notably, he announced his intention to kill off the character of Simone LaRochechew, in accordance to her creator's wishes. He didn't act quickly enough, and the Wikipedia was taken down from the web altogether. Although his anger was understandable, Chris revealed in his next video that he never intended to kill Simone in the first place, and that the apology was not true and honest. We had all suspected as much, but it's nice to get a confirmation once in a while. After Wikipedia returned, he did indeed kill Simone, but only under pressure, and in the most contrived, dull, yet very lulzy way possible. The one apology that arguably highlights Chris's insincerity the most is his in-comic apology to the Asperpedia 4, which takes place while condemning them to death. The cognitive dissonance this creates would be overwhelming to any sane person, but for some reason, Chris thought that this ludicrous, non-apologetic apology was both okay and that the recipients would accept it as genuine. In that very same issue, in fact, Chris at one point sheds a tear after sealing up the populated 4-cent garbage building and destroying it. You know, because faking remorse with crocodile tears totally justifies mass murder. Chris's insincerity can also be seen in Chris's misadventures with the wallflower. When the shit hit the fan and she cut off all ties with him, he made his usual pathetic display of sorrow, making it very clear in the process that he had only wanted her for sex. When his apology failed to work as planned, Chris became very angry and spiteful, and started demanding that she apologize for hurting his feelings. Another came from his apology note on his Facebook discovered in October 2012. In it, he seemingly came to the realization that he had massively messed up, that about as many laughs had been gotten from him as possible, and that he was sorry for it all happening. Surprisingly, it was a very well-written, unselfish apology that would seem somewhat convincing, right until he demanded that all instances of trolling and websites dedicated to him be stopped and removed. And there was absolutely no mention made of him making any attempt to straighten up. All he wanted was all the bad stuff about him removed so he can feel better about himself. Had he not included that, people might have actually taken him seriously, but, as usual, he had to fuck himself over. Let's check out this email to Vivian. "Now that I finally have peace of mind, I apologize for the past unformalities and emotional outbursts in past communications. I have decided I will fully approve your continued audiobook videos and sales, but in return, I ask for 25% of all of the money, changed to USA currency, you have, and will have, made from all that you have put together and sold, as well as 2 copies of each CD/DVD for the audiobooks, and 2 of each other additional merchandise aside from the audiobooks. I extend an olive branch of peace, and I await your well-thought response. Have a good, safe day, Miss Vivian. Christian W. Chandler." Common traits of a quick apology. Explanation. One recurring element in Chris's admissions of guilt is an explanation of why he did whatever he's apologizing for. The way these speeches are worded often indicates that Chris believes that if we just understood his intentions, we would all agree with him and that nobody would be offended. A famous example appears in the Captain's Log Stardate April 28, 2009 video. Chris explains that yes, he videotaped himself performing a selection of disturbing sex acts, but it was all for his sweetheart Ivy, and this evidently renders his actions understandable and acceptable. Supposedly speaking to a young child who was deeply disturbed by his behavior, he tells her that his behavior was perfectly reasonable because he is both an adult and human. This combination of warped logic and even more warped worldview is a crucial component of his breakthrough into mainstream infamy. Another good example would be the time he used the worst terrorist attack in American history for an exceedingly bad joke. After learning that Casey came from a military family, Chris did what was expected of him and made a public apology. However, he was more concerned with continuing to slander Clyde Cash and assuring that he was a good American, although he didn't know the words to his own national anthem, than actually expressing remorse and making an attempt to recompense. The joke was mainly directed at how weak Clyde Cash was. I had no idea or intention of offending anyone, other than Clyde, on such a massive worldwide level. Chris's written apology. Within the same video, he changed the Photoshop he'd done of the World Trade Center towers into birthday candles. That he saw no problem presenting an image of two buildings on fire and repeatedly calling them weak while he asserted that he was a good American proves that he completely missed the point of what he was supposed to be apologizing for. He was far more concerned with sullying Clyde's name than any blowback or offense his comics might have caused. In at least one case, though, Chris came up with a fantastical reason related to his fictional universe for something he did wrong, as though it would be easy to understand by anyone else's truth. Specifically, when Chris attempted reparations with Mary Lee Walsh, he explained that by slandering the real Mary Lee Walsh via comic villain counterpart, he allowed an evil witch to soil her reputation, and that by retconning the evil Mary a slaw wheel with her being portrayed getting arrested, he expected the good/real Mary would accept this nonsensical so-called apology and all would be well, not once admitting to violating campus regulations countless times, let alone personally attacking her when she tried to hash things out with him. Rationalization. Chris is incredibly self-righteous. In his mind, he's the only decent man left in the world, and everybody else is a stupid, evil jerk whose sole mission is to cockblock him because he is special, and furthermore out of jealousy for his many successes in life. This mindset gives Chris all the justification he needs to mistreat others, because as far as he's concerned, they're all the bad guys, standing in the way of his heroic quest. This everything I do is right mindset shows through when he is forced to talk about his prior transgressions. Chris might offer a half-assed apology simply to conform to the wishes of whoever he's talking to, but it will often be accompanied by a long explanation as to why he had to do it. I was wrong. I pretended to be him, yet he was the liar. I'm the real deal. So on that part, I was wrong for the right reasons. Chris, almost admitting to wrongdoing. He exhibited this self-righteous attitude many times in the Liquid Chris saga, because he is the true and honest Christian. This gave him the right to attempt to steal Liquid's girlfriend by pretending to be him, and then gloat about it once he apparently achieved his aim. Once again, Chris saw no wrong in this. Since Liquid wronged him by trolling him in the first place, anything he did in response was entirely justified. Though as it would turn out, ego is not the only culprit behind Chris rationalizing deeds that he should be apologetic for. For a recent example, Chris, in the throes of declining mental health, justified himself initiating his affair with Barb by arguing in statements he wrote following his arrest that he did it as a form of divine intervention to purify his elderly mother of her sins. To pour salt on an open gash, he eventually flat out denied that his soul bonding was ever sexual in nature, despite earlier admissions to sexual contact with his mom existing, once again proving that Chris doesn't truly feel remorse for any wrongdoing he commits. Maturing. I have matured. Chris's catchphrase. Ever since the Doopy saga, Chris had the tendency to claim that he has not only learned his lesson, but that he has also matured. Chris uses this as an excuse to avoid any kind of responsibility or backlash from trolls, who understandably view him as childish for many of his interests and actions. Retraction. Chris, believing that his actions are always right, nearly always has to be pressured into making any form of apology at all. Most, if not all, of his apologies are motivated by the people he physically desires, be they obvious troll or otherwise, or desires to appease, rather than the public outcry he causes, and certainly not by any true sense of guilt. His retraction of an apology is often redundant because nobody believed he was truly remorseful in the first place, and just as hollow as the apology itself, in that Chris is quite happy to lie to save face or to gain something he wants. For instance, Chris finally sincerely apologized to Alec and Mal for his actions towards them on the 2nd of March 2010. However, only a month later, on the 8th of April, he was talking to Jackie and, in an attempt to gain sympathy from her, claimed that Alec was trying to one-up him for months now. When trolls hacked his PSN account, he made a near-public apology. A blatant attempt to get his PSN account back, the apology was, of course, chock full of lies and insincerity. One of his favorite ways to smite the invisible internet enemies and real-life foes alike is to lay a Kamehameha upon them, thinking that he has powers akin to something more along the lines of Wicca, Voodoo, or Goku from Dragon Ball Z than the Christianity he supposedly practices. He only issued the Kamehameha reaction after his latest girlfriend told him that he shouldn't have used the Kamehameha in the first place. Considering he quickly returned to his ways of cursing, threatening, and insulting his enemies, the sentiment obviously didn't stick. Shifting blame. When Chris isn't trying to justify the trouble he causes, he usually resorts to blaming others. The most famous example is him blaming ED for the end of his friendship with Megan, even though it was because of a picture he himself thought up, drew, and then uploaded to his article. Chris had it literally screamed at him in Mumble 3, but then, as now, he still doesn't know the true reason. The best anyone has ever been able to extract from Chris is that he came on too strong. While technically true, this is a vast understatement that fails to capture the massive amount of fault which lies with Chris. That is to say, all of it. The Wallflower. Chris went to great lengths to keep the knowledge of the Wallflower away from the slanderous trolls of the internet. However, he really wanted to credit her in one of his sycophantic Little Big Planet levels. Chris asked the Wallflower if she thought it would be safe to credit Wallflower by her ff.net pin name. Wallflower agreed as she was unable to find any obvious trails leading from her ff.net account to her Facebook account. Unfortunately for both of them, trolls still managed to find a link between the two accounts within 24 hours of Chris dropping her pin name. After she was linked to the site and promptly horrified by how much of her personal information had been compromised, she politely requested that the article be reworked with her privacy in mind. As much of the information in the original Wallflower article had very little to do with Chris, the request was deemed reasonable and the admins of the Quickie complied. Frightened and disgusted by what she had found, she broke off all contact with Chris. She clarified to the Quickie admins that she had never dated, never had any kind of relationship beyond casual association, and before her introduction to the Quickie, she really didn't know much about him at all. Chris, however, not to be deterred, proclaimed many times that he had been on several dates and shared DNA, along with enjoying a kiss and a massage. Since this would have been Chris's real first kiss, aside from Chloe, a lie, it was considered important by obsessive Quickie editors to see if he remembers it later. The Wallflower Wikipedia page was written on April the 19th. However, leaked emails from Jackie show that by the 10th of April, 9 days after making this highly suspicious claim, Chris had either momentarily forgotten that he had been kissed, something that would have been a monumental occasion in his life, lied on his Wikipedia page about being kissed, or lied to Jackie about not being kissed, though that is very unlikely. Either way, he still lied about the kiss, although it's possible he's basing his story on a gross exaggeration of the truth. The two sharing a drinking straw is the current troll favorite for this. In the month following their breakup, Chris would go on to blame the Wallflower for having an internet presence at all. From Chris's perspective, the whole incident was Wallflower's fault for having a Facebook page for trolls to discover in the first place. Chris repeatedly insisted that Wallflower was the one who needed to apologize to him, as she had okayed the use of her screen name, despite the fact that putting her screen name in the level was his idea in the first place. More than a year after the debacle, Chris made it obvious that he believes that the person who should apologize to Wallflower is Surfshack Tito rather than himself. Forgetting. Aside from directly shifting blame by lying, Chris has been frequently known to forget important, critical details of his life, typically memories that either make him look or feel bad. When Jackie was flirting with him by emails and found out about the Quickie, she asked Chris about cheating on Ivy with Vanessa, the full details of which are documented right here. That hyperlink just leads to the Ivy saga, which will be a story for another day. Chris, of course, claimed that the whole thing was a troll deception and that Jackie shouldn't believe it. When Jackie informed Chris that she found a video of him admitting it and confessing, Chris claimed he forgot this portion. On October 27th in 2008, Chris nervously announced that he had found his one true sweetheart, Chloe. Many things immediately leapt out at the trolls as being lies, including his previous announcements on an IRC chat. Due to Chris's unreliable short-term memory and inaction on the part of trolls, after the 27th of October video, Chloe was never mentioned again in a video by Chris. A little more than a year later, in Mailbag 13, rather than simply admit he was lying, Chris claimed, "I currently have no recollection of Chloe," even though she was supposedly the woman he had his first real kiss with. In Mumble 6, the troll army called out Chris on his statements regarding transgendered women. Chris claimed that he forgot his previous statement, which may or may not be completely honest. In any event, Chris has discovered that, real or otherwise, a faulty memory is a socially acceptable way to dodge probing questions about one's past lies. Index of Chris's apologies. Below is an abridged list of Chris's various apologies for his many misdeeds. Small apologies may have been missed here and there, but these are the big ones. When Megan called Chris out on his reprehensible actions regarding the porn he drew of her, he first copy and pasted "Megan, I'm sorry for hurting you" 15 times in an email to her, then went into detail about how a handjob works, figuring that sexual frustration and ignorance were the root causes of her anger. Yeah, about that. After Chris was banned from the game place, he tried several times to get unbanned. The first was a video where Chris apologizes just so he can buy more junk. The second was where he prepared a script, stashed a camera in his pocket, then walked into the game place to confront Michael Snyder, claiming that he had changed and apologizing for his actions. After Michael flatly refused to listen and called the cops, Chris berated him and hoped God would forgive him for being so heartless and cruel. Mike responded he probably will, and Chris stormed out, but not before calling him a Jew. After threatening Vivian's life after she made better audiobooks than he did, Chris apologized to her, then made a demand for a cut of her profits, the two sentences separated by only a single dot. Chris made an apology video after releasing a series of videos insulting various YouTubers. Aside from sounding half-assed and insincere about it, Chris's motivation for doing so was clear. His PSN account was being held hostage by the last YouTuber he had insulted. In I Am Alive, Chris apologizes for his ungentlemanly conduct regarding Asperchew. This was a transparent attempt to get the homo ads removed from the Wikipedia, and his behavior subsequent to this apology proved he meant nothing he said in the video. In Sonichu 10, Chris apologized to the Asperchew 4 while simultaneously having them brutally executed, including having one of them killed by a toddler. After filming himself performing sex acts for Ivy, Chris apologized for his actions, supposedly to a young girl who had found the footage and was scarred by it. But he structured his apology to state that his behavior was, in fact, completely normal and that she shouldn't feel bad for watching it. In Matthew 5:27, Quick Confessions, Chris apologized for cheating on Ivy. In 2009, Chris apologized to Mary Lee Walsh for slandering her via his fictionalized villainous counterpart using her name, not for actively defiant and vindictive behavior towards her, mind you. The contradictory nature of the retcon aside, Chris drew up a picture depicting this very act of remorse and even went to the trouble of delivering a hand-framed copy to her office, to which she responded with legal action. Chris took this as well as you would expect. After mocking the worst act of terrorism in United States history, Chris made a subsequent apology video, which featured the Twin Towers as candles on a birthday cake, complete with multiple gouts of flame flying from the top. When Casey discovered that Chris had pretended to be the other better Chris in order to get a travel visa to China, Chris apologized by way of his video "I Love You, Casey," where he claimed he, quote, was wrong for the right reasons. Chris finally sincerely apologized to Alec and Mao for his actions towards them on the 2nd of March. However, only a month later, on the 8th of April, he was talking to Jackie and, in an attempt to gain sympathy from her, claimed that Alec was trying to one-up him for months now. On October 21, 2012, Chris posted a public Facebook status apologizing for past misdeeds. He immediately asked that all online groups and individual hatreds be disbanded. On the 17th of December 2014, 3 letters were leaked on the Quickie forums that Chris wrote to the Charlottesville Fashion Square, Walmart, and Mary Lee Walsh. Naturally, in each one, he shoehorns in references to trolls causing stress. On the 29th of October 2015, Chris uploaded a YouTube video explaining his apology for his prior homophobia. However, barely 1 minute into the video, he stressed the importance of Sonichu and Rosechu being straight, showing a facet of his old self that hadn't truly disappeared completely. On the 20th of December 2020, Chris was forced to apologize for being accused of stealing mods, which was backed by evidence. Chris, being controlled by Sonichu Prime, denounces these claims yet apologizes anyway, owing to the issues being due to him still learning about modding and using Blender. He ended the tirade by telling the haters to be grateful and stop bad-mouthing him. On the 24th of September 2021, in a letter dated 5 days prior, Chris stated that he intended to enact repentance for his crime of stealing $750 from his aging mother's bank account, a crime he attempted to rationalize only moments before citing his own poor finances and his fears arising from being made temporarily homeless, and for which he attempted to shift blame by claiming that Noel had personally betrayed his trust and failed his destined test by alerting others of his act of theft. Not a word was spared for certain other offenses, just as recent and even more damning. Conclusion: to Chris, remorse is nothing more than a formality that he must pantomime in order to get what he wants. Chris rarely, if at all, ever feels guilt for something he has said or done and expects either pity and sympathy or for those he hurt to forgive and forget. If you expect he would ever be sincerely sorry for anything he does without an ulterior motive behind it, you are expecting way too much of him. And with that, that's going to be it for today's video. I had a lot of fun with this one. It had only been a short while since our last quickie reading, and of course, these are always my favorite topic, right? Speaking of, I feel like I learned a fair bit and I hope you did as well. There's nothing quite like learning about the faults of another person you'll never meet. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. But with that, if you like what I do, leave a comment, rate, and subscribe. If you want to support me in a more personal way, you can check out the Patreon link and the Teespring link in the description. There's some new listings on the store, so if you want to check those out, be my guest. And if you like behind-the-scenes content, my Patreon is the way to go. I've got more content coming down the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you degenerates next time.